You are listening to Committed, an ongoing conversation about marriage, intimacy, relationships, and sex. I'm a marriage and relationship coach dedicated to helping couples and individuals like you build stronger, more fulfilling relationships. I have a deep understanding of communication dynamics, conflict resolution, and intimacy. I guide clients through challenges with compassion and expertise. Welcome back to the pod. You have another edition of yours truly, and I have needed some time to figure some things out because if you've been following on TikTok, I've shared a little bit about myself, and I think that this might be a really great episode to actually reintroduce myself because reality is my podcast is not new, but my YouTube channel is. And I started to produce episodes. And then what I actually did after I produced and put out a few episodes, which felt kind of haphazard just because I got started, I moved my location a few times, and then I kind of dropped off because my life got really, really crazy. So I want to almost start over. Let's start over. Hi, I'm Taya. And I want to tell you a bit about me, especially because on my TikTok over the past handful of months, I've had a bunch of new followers. And so if you're coming into it, I think that what I've learned over the years is people want to know, like, what is your background? Who are you? How are you in the place that you're at right now? How did you get here? And I've done it in the past, but I haven't done it recently. So, welcome to my podcast. It is called Committed. The origin of this podcast is essentially my best friend Michael was like, we should do a podcast because every single time we talk on the phone, we will talk for hours. Not recently, because there hasn't been any time for that, but we will talk for hours and we will talk about sex and relationships. And my friendship with Michael goes way, way back now. And I think I'll get into that. And what I estimate is that this is going to be a longer form episode, but that I'm going to split it up into parts because I think that that will be most helpful and digestible. If I go all the way back and kind of go back to my childhood and tell you about that part of my life all the way up until now, how I got to the place that I'm at, it's going to take quite a long time. I've been listening to the podcast of Adam and Danielle Busby from the show Outdaughtered, which was on TLC. I'm not sure if you guys have ever watched that show, but years and years ago, I totally binge watched the show, or I just waited until every episode came out. I can't remember, but I just remember loving it. They are a married couple and they live in Texas. I believe they live in Texas still, unless they live back in Louisiana where they're from. And they had quintuplets. And so TLC made a whole series on their life with quintuplets, and then they also have an older daughter. And so they just started a podcast, and I've been listening to that and just so interested because it's sort of a blast from the past, right? I just loved the series. And it's funny because when you see the TV show, you obviously get a perception, and this is the case for every TV show. You get a snippet. This is the case for social media. You get a snippet. And what I think is fun and cool about podcasts is that, and even cooler with the addition of video podcasts so you can watch people, but that you get a real taste of who they are and what their life looks like and how they got to the point where they are at right now because they're actually telling you about it. And so I want to share with you guys a lot of it about me and how I got to the place that I'm at. And I think something that has been difficult about this is that I'm bridging a gap because I own my own practice and I work with clients, and I'm a coach. And so I'll go into like my background and training in this episode as well, or the next few episodes as I break this recording up. But I'm bridging a gap because I'm a coach and I work with clients, I work with couples and individuals. And as I do that work in this helping profession that is in the realm of mental health, I'm not trying to impose myself on other people as much as possible. It's impossible to say that I'm going to be able to do that 100%. But also, in my field of coaching, which is where I was trained, I also do share myself. Like, I share pieces and parts of myself in order to connect with my clients. And I think in relational therapy, those therapists also do that. But in therapy, you're either not doing it at all, because I've encountered all different types of therapists. Some are not sharing at all about themselves, and they want you to know as little as possible in order to not to be rude, but to not impose their personal belief systems as much as possible, or have the therapeutic process shift to the therapist, which is inappropriate, right? If you're working with someone, then it's about you, they're working for you. But in the relational therapeutic process, when people's modality of work is relational, in order to be authentic, and in order to, if you really believe in that process, in order to allow your clients to make progress, you're also sharing bits and pieces of yourself potentially, and you are at the very least sharing your reactions to your client, right? Whereas, and this is a little confusing to some, so I apologize if that's the case. But just to kind of break it down, some therapists remain completely neutral as much as possible. There's always going to be some bias, but try to remain as neutral as possible. And other therapists work with you more in a more connected way, where they are sharing themselves, at the very least, their reactions and responses to you. And so you're seeing more of that connection with them. And like I said, for myself personally, I've worked with both types of therapists, where you have a completely, as completely as possible neutral person, and someone who is more connected and shares more. And it varies from person to person, from practice to practice. And it's really based on what people are comfortable with and what they believe in. And so for me, I think what's important to me in sharing this is that I'm bridging a gap in my practice, right? Like, I want to always remain as neutral as possible for my clients to help them make the most progress. But I also believe that there is a lot of value in being able to share with them what's happening for me, and in certain cases, how some of my experiences might be similar to what they've gone through, to help them feel as though they are not alone, and know that they're not alone in what they're experiencing. And it's a dabble, because sometimes it's helpful and sometimes it works, and sometimes it crashes and burns. But the way that I work is that, all right, we need to work through this. Like, if I've shared an example of something and it crashes and burns and it doesn't resonate with you, or you're frustrated by it, or whatever happens, we're now going to use this relationship to work through that. And through my training, we call it, a relationship lab, where we're doing this relationship with one another and we're working through it as we go. But there's a lot more vulnerability on my side in that way. And that can be exhausting. And I'm not going to say that it's caused complete burnout in me, but it's caused some of that, because I don't hold myself to the standard that I remain completely neutral in all situations, because I believe that it's inauthentic. And even for myself, when I've worked with people in the past, I have felt that inauthenticity, and I have often not stayed with the practitioner. So that does at least partially inform some of where kind of I sit and the way that I work with clients. So that now leads me to this place where I've been struggling and have struggled for years because I've been doing this work for quite a while now. And I always wonder, sometimes I find that it lands with people when I share myself and my story. And for my long-term clients, it's really helpful for them. It's like they feel like they know me. They do know me. They don't know every single thing about me, but they know pieces and parts, and it's helpful in their process. And it helps them grow and heal in certain ways to be able to feel that connection to me and that relationship that exists between the two of us. At the same time, I have to manage that because when people know too much, it can sometimes be detrimental, and that vulnerability can then be used oppositely against me. So it's like, what do I do, right? And I've had my social media accounts for years now. Well, I use LinkedIn. I have YouTube. I have TikTok. I do not have Instagram. I do not use Facebook for my business. I did use it for personal, but I'm not a big social media person, and hate to say that as you're sitting there on social media watching this right now, which I greatly appreciate. I love YouTube, and I do workouts on YouTube. I sometimes will watch short clips on YouTube. I don't mind TikTok. I like TikTok. I like to watch some of the cuts, like one of the ways that I wind down at the end of the night. But I am very, very acutely aware of the detriment of social media. And there's a great book back there, actually, The Anxious Generation, and it's all about the research on anxiety and depression in adolescence by social media. And so the research has really proven this direct correlation and causation, and then that's a scary thing. And I'm a person with children, and so that absolutely frightens me to not feel like I have control over that. At a certain point in their life, I do now, but there will be a time when I have less control over it. And it's important to me to be aware of that with my children as well, because my use, and it's like explain that, like, okay, mom's doing it, and then I'm not allowed to do it, and then why is mom doing it? What is she doing? And what am I supposed to be able to do, and all that? How do I navigate that? So that's, another topic for another day as well, and something that could be really interesting to go through. I would absolutely love your comments, thoughts, suggestions about that. So let's kind of get into it. I'm going to start from the beginning, and I'm just going to kind of see where this goes. And like I said, I'm going to split it up. So who am I? I'm from Connecticut. I grew up in a family where I have an older brother and sister who are half, and we have the same dad, different moms, and I have a younger sister who is from the same mom and dad, and we lived in the same household for our entire childhood. The way that I look at my childhood now, I would say, is different than the way that I previously looked at it. And one of the big reasons why I decided to look at it, period, because I know some of you probably haven't dove into what your childhood was all about. You have little like memories from the past, certain things that you remember. Your body somatically probably remembers feelings, like an overall, like I had a good childhood, or like I didn't feel like I had a good childhood, and I don't have a great explanation for that. I was in the camp of I'm experiencing symptoms and I'm struggling in my relationships, but I don't exactly know the why behind that, and I don't exactly understand what happened to get to this point. A lot of people think like I just am the way that I am because that's just who I am. And I know that there's a combination of, our genetics that makes us who we are, as well as our experiences within our upbringing. And that molds and forms the people that we are today. And so I started to get really curious about that at a point in my life that I'll get to in this podcast series. I really had not gone on that discovery before. I really wasn't aware of it. I wasn't really aware that it was available to me. At the time, it was something that, I wasn't, it didn't come to mind, nobody told me about it. I didn't have a great support system that was like, oh, maybe you should seek out a therapist. And so I just kind of sat in that struggle. But what I ended up doing instead of just going to see a therapist was I kind of went on my own journey to figure some things out. And I was certainly in a rut. So, okay, so that's a little background on like why I would even want to dive into some of this and look into it and understand it. But I'm one of 4 siblings. I'm the oldest of my one of 2 siblings that I lived with, and my younger sister is 2.5 years younger than I am. And I lived with her, and I lived with my parents, and my older brother and sister were a lot older than me. So, like, I have always been close with my older brother and sister, and I love them. They were like parents to me when I was younger because of how much older they were, and just because of the relationship that they put a lot of effort and work into cultivate over time. Looking back on my childhood, I don't have very fond memories. I have memories of my brother and sister, lots of good memories with them, specific things that stick out, like going to Dunkin' Donuts with my older sister, going to this seafood restaurant that's local to me with my brother, my sister picking me up and bringing me to her house for a weekend or a week or a sleepover. Those memories just, I guess the feeling just comes up like whenever I see them. It even feels like emotional talking about that right now, just because of how much they mean to me and have always meant to me. Also, a really pivotal person in my life was my grandfather, who passed away fairly recently over the past couple years. He was like a parent to me. We spent a lot of time together and did a lot of really just simple things that just had a profound impact on me. And I think some of the biggest reasons around that for my grandfather and my brother and sister is just that I felt that they were really interested in me. They were really curious about me. They really cared about me. They cared about the things that I was interested in. My brother and sister specifically, when I would tell them when I was younger, I remember with my sister, I wanted to be an interior designer. That was something that I felt really passionate about when I was a kid. And I think about, my older daughter wanting to be a scientist and a baker. Those are her 2 career paths that she wants right now. And my sister said, I know an interior designer. I've found someone in town, and let's just sit down and have a meeting with her and talk about what her job is like. And I don't remember if we actually did it, but just the very act of her being interested and finding a connection in something that I was interested in had a huge impact on me as a kid. And these 3 relationships that really stick out to me were so impactful because there were things happening at home that were not so great. And when I think about, when I think back, those times in my life felt very lonely. I felt as a kid very lonely and very neglected. And in certain cases, my needs were neglected. And so growing up and feeling that way in my family then translated over to school. So I had a very challenging time socially in school. I switched schools a couple of times because of convenience for my parents and kind of just wanting to try something new and shift me over. I don't know 100% the rationale on that or if it was completely thought through. Definitely wasn't coming from a bad place at all on the part of my mom specifically, but it did have an impact on me. I went from public school to Catholic school for 2 years and then back to public school. And so I was in second grade when I started Catholic school. So I completed second and third grade in the Catholic school that was right near my house, which is part of the reason why it was definitely this convenience factor for my parents. And then I went back to public school. So missing 2 years had a really profound impact on me. And I know like there's a lot of people out there who have moved a lot. They've moved. People get through those moves. People in the military move all the time, but I think what sticks out to me is that I didn't have a very secure base or foundation at home, and that was where I was spending most of my time. These really impactful people in my life that I look back on and I am so grateful for and have lots of gratitude towards, they were there, but they couldn't be there all of the time, and I would say that they were there a lot and they participated a lot. And my grandpa especially, because he was right down the road, and my grandma as well. But there's no way for them to be there completely all of the time. And I think also I didn't have the words to verbalize exactly what was going on all the time or what I was feeling. And what was happening in my home was just my norm. And so it's like, well, what am I, and I would see their interactions with the other people in my life and it wasn't horrible. And so I just had to kind of go along with it. But I realized as I got older, the effects that it had on me. So I spent a lot of time alone. From the moment I was allowed to be home alone, I was home alone. And that's just what it was. I spent lots of time alone and lots of time trying to kind of process those feelings of loneliness and not getting certain needs met. When I was young, before I was allowed to stay home alone, my mom worked a lot, and I, over time, built a lot of resentment over that. Whereas now, in my 30s, I can really kind of think through and rationalize what happened and why what happened in terms of the choice to work and just wanting a better life for our family and more opportunities and more money to do more with. But that did come at a cost. And my dad has since passed away. He passed away about 7 years ago. But I spent a lot of time with him. So it was a back and forth with my grandparents and my dad. And so I think, it was probably a certain period of time in my life, because it's difficult to really think about, just because I know that if my mom were here right now, like in this room, she would say, that she was there a lot. But I think what must have happened is that the time that she wasn't there ended up being super impactful for me. And so it kind of overtook everything, if that makes sense. And I hate to look back on it and have that be my reality. Like, that's one of the biggest things that I've struggled with, if you have a less than optimal childhood, and we can talk about, ACEs maybe in another episode, and I can kind of go through the adverse childhood experiences, and we'll get to that. But when I look back at those things, like, I developed these symptoms of PTSD, and they took me away from the present and really being able to enjoy, because I know, looking back, that there were happy memories. But as I look back, there's a lot of like emotionality that goes along with it. I would say, I hate to label it negative, but it's very uncomfortable to think about and to experience. And so with all of that, I grew up, I did the best that I could. I very much struggled socially. I very much struggled in school. I felt like an oddball. I felt like the odd man out pretty much all of the time. And so it was like survival. I was just trying to survive. And, looking at the life that I have now, and I'm sure a lot of us can look back and say, it's so strange to like think about, because it's like, well, I'm pretty much normal now. Like everything's normal. Like I just grew up to be a normal kid. And I'm sure a lot of people can look back and say that. But at that time, I was like, how could I possibly, like, what is my, like, I didn't even think of, like, what is my future gonna, I just would dream of just getting out and just dipping. Like, I'm just done with all of this. There was a constant feeling of, I don't have control. And when I was a kid, my dad owned an auto parts store. That was his whole career. And he was very successful. But also there wasn't a lot of money in it. And so there was a lot of working that went on his time. And he was very much a children will be seen and not heard. My needs come before my children's needs. What needs? What needs could a child possibly have? So there was a lot of time that I spent in a dirty auto parts store, when I was hungry, eating Chinese food sauces from their wrappers because I was bored and I was ready for dinner, and dinner wasn't there until 9-10 o'clock. And I do remember some protesting that I did about that. I would struggle a bit with my dad and kind of go head to head a little bit, because I was like, we're hungry, we want to leave, we're tired, we want to go home, we don't want to stay here anymore. And that was something that if it didn't work for him, it wasn't going to happen. It was all about him. And there's a specific phrase that my older sister has said that kind of comes to mind when I think about it. And sometimes I think we can laugh about it now, but it certainly wasn't funny to me at the time. It was just hard. Yeah. So I got used to being under somebody else's command, under my parents' command. And I think, like, nowadays parenting is so different, because we do think about what our children need, and we think about, how they're feeling, and we talk to them about their feelings. And it was certainly a different time and place. Like when my dad grew up, his childhood was different and parenting was different, and the way that you looked at parenting your children was just totally different. And he obviously carried that with him into adulthood and parented his children that way. But it had such a profound impact on me, and I think my siblings as well. And we've all kind of taken it a little bit differently. And I think just kind of keeping in mind that it was me and my little sister, and my older brother and sister were adults at that time, and they were out, they were living their lives, and they were coming back, and they were spending time with us and doing what they could. And I remember having a conversation a couple years ago with my sister, and just hearing her say, like, her and my brother had like a pact that they weren't going to let my little sister's childhood be like their childhood. And so they had like a mission. And I think that based on what they actually had control over and what they could do, their capacity, like they needed to go out and just be adults and live their life and be happy and have freedom from that as well. Mission accomplished maybe on their end. And I don't know if they believe that. I don't know if that's how they feel about what they could do. And there are certain conversations that I haven't had with them, because while I'm really close with them, they've tried to protect me from a lot. And I think as I became an adult, they were willing to share a bit more, but they didn't, they wanted to shield me from some of that. And so anyways, there was some that I, ended up having to kind of endure. And there were other things that I was able to escape with other people. And I think the last thing for this part that I'll say is just that my mom's role in this has had a profound impact on me. I've had a lot of healing with her over the past 6 to 8 months, I would say. I love my mom, and I've always loved my mom, and I think that our relationship has strengthened because we've been able to talk about things where we weren't in the past. Before my dad died, things were totally different, and I'm grateful that we've been able to have some of those conversations, because the way that trauma often works is that you don't want to think about it. You want it to come up in your daily as little as humanly possible. You don't want to talk about it with anyone. I think for a very long time, and it still is sort of like a weird feeling that I have inside, that it's hard to say, but it's sometimes the way that you feel about trauma is no, this couldn't possibly have happened. This couldn't possibly have been the case and been my life. I'm making this story up. I'm making this up. It didn't really occur. That's what's been so hard about it. That's the number one thing that's been so difficult, is because I think it's hard to explain, but to say these things out loud feel very challenging, because I often feel like somebody's going to come back and invalidate me. I have felt for a long time very, very invalidated about my experience without even talking about my experience. That couldn't possibly have happened. You're just defective. That was the general energy that was sort of put out, by my father, you are a nuisance, you get in the way, you are something and someone that I just have to deal with, and that I have to just handle, and you in and of yourself are not valuable and worthy, but you're, at certain times you're a trophy for me. And I can maybe talk about some of that later, but my dad loved cars and car shows, and so he would bring my little sister and I to these car shows and almost show us off like we were these prized possessions, but then almost discard us when we weren't in public. So you're worthy of taking care of and being kind to and meeting your needs when I'm doing my hobbies, and I'm bringing you and I'm showing you off, and we're going to have a fun time and do these things. But then when it's inconvenient for me, I don't want anything to do, leave me alone and don't get in my way and just shut up, essentially. And so, yeah, that was really hard. It was really hard it felt very manipulative. And I grew to really hate car shows. And eventually, when I got older and I was able to, I wouldn't go. I was absolutely not. 0% chance I will never go to a car show again. And I remember it felt so wrong after my dad died. They had a car show. People that he interacted with, friends that he had, they threw this car show for him. And I remember showing up, and I'm an adult at this point, right? I have children, and I was I don't want to be here. And I remember my mom was I don't want to be here. We didn't want to go. We didn't want to be part of it. But I felt this resentment towards my mom because while my mom was not the perpetrator, my mom was not there because she was trying to build a better life for us. But by doing that, it took her away from us. And so trying to balance that as a mom is difficult, right? Because like I have hopes, dreams, goals that I want to achieve. And some of that means that I can't be present for my children at all times, but it also means that I need to leave them in good care and in good hands. And balancing the amount of time that I'm willing to be away is something that I've battled over time because I feel guilty. And many of us parents and moms, you know, people talk about the mom guilt. I'm sure there's dads who have guilt as well. That mom guilt is real for me of like, maybe I should just be satisfied. But I think as humans and as parents, we all want what's best for our children and we want the next best thing for them. We want to build a better life than we have had. You know, we all want that. Or maybe some people want the exact life that they had because they loved their childhood. But I want something better for my children. But I also recognize that for myself and my life now, I don't want to completely take myself away from them. And so part of my career has been having the balance of how can I be there for my kids and how can I get them off the bus and pick them up from daycare and be present with them and be the one making dinner with them and be the one to put them to bed. And I've done that for many years, and that was part of the idea in opening my practice to be able to have that flexibility. Not everyone has that luxury, but I would say that it's not quite a privilege that I was able to make it work. It was a mission that I had. So I'm going to leave that as part 1, and I'm going to come back with part 2, and I'm going to continue on with my story. And I just thank you for joining in. Please leave me comments. Please leave me a review. I have said in the past, I will mail you a copy of my card deck for couples if you leave me an awesome review. I appreciate it. I want this channel to grow, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for tuning into the podcast. If you're new to our community, welcome. We really want our podcast to grow, so please like, follow, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star review with your feedback on how we can make your experience most catered to you. As I work with my private clients continuously, this podcast is a great way for me to help more of you. Please reach out if you have any ideas for an episode